Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review. Today I'm looking at a product provided by a patron, and once again it's Jeff to the rescue, so thank you Jeff for providing the FiiO BTR5. That's this little beastie here. It's a Bluetooth and wired DAC from FiiO. It's capable of doing balanced and single-ended output, as well as having that Bluetooth connectivity to your phone, your laptop, etc. I happen to already have a competitor of the BTR5 that I'd bought for my own use, and have since also received the Shanling version of the same type of device. So I've got a few comparisons coming up in this review for you to decide which is the best Bluetooth DAC for you. Hopefully you're noticing some differences in the sound in this review. I've finally got my new microphone set up going. I'm no longer tied to anything with wires or wireless mics that create noise and all sorts of stuff. Hopefully the sound from this video is the best yet. If you've got any concerns with it, do let me know so I can keep tweaking and improving the quality of these reviews. For now though, let's start talking about the BTR5. The BTR5 retails for $110 or about 200 Australian dollars, so it's actually a fairly affordable device when you take into account what it can do. And just to recap on that, this is both a Bluetooth connected DAC, which means you can take any Bluetooth source such as a laptop, a smartphone, etc., pair it up to this device, send the signal through, and then output from here into either single-ended or balanced headphones. You can also have it work as a line out into a car, so there's a few different variations on the Bluetooth setup. What's great though is that it's also a USB DAC, so you can connect using the USB-C socket on the base and use it as a normal wired DAC, again from a computer, from a phone, whatever the device is, as long as it's got USB digital output. Inside the BTR5 is a pair of Sabre 9218 DACs, and those are capable of decoding DSD256 and PCM all the way up to 384 kHz. So it's a really versatile device with plenty of processing power. It doesn't do MQA, but that's about the only shortcoming of this, and even then it's only a shortcoming if you're actually into MQA. The final thing I want to point out is that it uses Bluetooth 5, which although very high quality and allowing for lots of different very high quality audio codecs, it's still not lossless. So don't think that Bluetooth is going to replace a wired connection. It's still not ever going to be as good until such time as somebody comes up with a lossless version of Bluetooth. For now though, it's very, very good. It's just not quite as good as wired. A couple of other specs I just want to mention quickly is that this has 9-hour battery life, and it's also got microphone built in for calls. So if you've got this somewhere close to your person, you can just seamlessly continue on a phone call when you're listening to music, keep using your IEMs or your headphones for the sound, and this for the microphone. So it's very versatile in that regard. It's got everything you can really think of needing in this style of device. In terms of power output, the single-ended output will deliver 80 milliwatts into 32 ohms, which is okay. It should do for most portable headphones. And using the balanced output boosts that up to a huge 240 milliwatts. Now I say huge, obviously it's not going to compete with a full-size desktop amplifier, but for a portable device, outputting 240 milliwatts should be absolutely enough for any headphone you're likely to use in portable situations. It's not going to drive really power-hungry planar magnetics perhaps, but all of the headphones that I think most people are likely to use when they're moving about, this should be able to cover it. While I'm talking features and functions, and let me put this down so I don't keep waving it around at you, the BTR5 can work with FiiO's music app. Now what's really nice is that the BTR5 offers you a range of controls over things like filters, an EQ which can be actually set so that everything you play through it, no matter what the source, everything has that EQ applied to it. So you've got the filters, you've got the EQ, various other little bits and pieces of settings. They've even got an ability to control the second and third order harmonics. So lots of different tweakability is built into the BTR5, and you can access all of that from an app on your phone. Most of those settings are available on the BTR5 itself, but it's really nice that you can also make changes using a nice large screen device like a smartphone. The FiiO Music app is also a playback app that works quite well. I don't tend to use apps like that because most of the time I'm using something like USB Audio Player Pro to maximize the sound quality output from Android and also link me through to Tidal. But if you're using local files and you are using Bluetooth only, the FiiO Music app could be a really good choice. Having just talked about Tidal, I should mention that the FiiO Music app does allow for DLNA streaming. So if you've got a home music server and you're around the house, you can connect up to that with the FiiO Music app and bring across your local tunes. However, there's no direct native support for services like Spotify, Tidal or Qobuz. One final piece I want to mention before moving on from the app is that for those of you that need balance controls, this actually has it. It's a really rare thing to find in devices like this, and I know that some people with hearing impairments on one side only really benefit from balance controls. So this has it, and it's worth picking up for that alone if you're looking for Bluetooth connectivity to your wired headphones, and or if you're just looking for a device that's going to give you balance control as a wired type DAC. So at this point, you're probably understanding as I did that this is a really fully featured device. It's like a pocket knife for audio. It's got everything you could need in it. It's got wired DAC, it's got Bluetooth, it's got EQs, filters, harmonics controls, you name it, it's got it in there. So it's really fully featured, and for the price, it's a really outstanding little device, at least on paper. Having spoken about all the features and functions, I should briefly talk about the controls and the buttons that are on the device itself. I've already talked about the fact that you've got balanced and single-ended outputs on one end, you've got a USB-C socket on the other end, and then you've got 3 buttons down the side. You've got a power button that also accesses the menu to change things like the filters. You've got a play pause button that also helps navigating the menu system. And then you've got a volume control with a plus and minus rocker that will also allow you to skip tracks forwards and backwards. So the controls are fairly simple. I do find navigating the menu a little bit clumsy using them because it's all about long presses, short presses, remembering which button does which. So that is a little bit clumsy, but ultimately I think it's fine because it's the sort of thing, once you get it set up, you're probably going to leave it and run with it as it is. Or as I said before, you can always jump over to the FiiO Music app. So now with all of those features and functions and controls and all those bits and pieces out of the way, let's talk sound. As a Bluetooth device, it sounds good, but I'd say it doesn't sound great. And the reason for that is it's got what I consider from my experience with FiiO products, which admittedly has been a bit of a gap in a number of years since my last experience with a FiiO product. But it's what I think of as the FiiO house sound, which is it's full and it's a little bit thick, but in the process it's a bit blunted in sound. A lot of the FiiO gear I've listened to has this kind of lack of dynamics. It's like the music wants to push a bit harder, but the system or the product is pulling it back a bit. I've heard lots of products on the market that have a thicker, warmer sound, but still allow space for the music to flow and for you as the listener to experience the full dynamics of the music. For some reason with the BTR5, as with other products in the past like the old X5 and X3s way back in the early generations, it just feels like the BTR5 is holding everything back a little bit. It's not bad, it's still enjoyable to listen to, but it hasn't got the dynamics and the freedom in the music that I would like to hear. Shifting over to DAC mode using a USB-C connection, I found it was a much better sound overall. It still has that overall character of slightly blunted, slightly thick and warm sound, but it's been opened up a bit by getting the full quality signal coming through the cable rather than lossy Bluetooth transmission. Both the single-ended and the balanced outputs sound good, but I definitely noticed a big improvement from balanced. The sounds are more separated and the dynamics are greatly improved just going from single-ended to balanced. And that's true with both Bluetooth and with the wired DAC. So think of it like this. The least sound quality version is using single-ended via Bluetooth, then you step up to balanced via Bluetooth, then single-ended as a DAC, a wired DAC, and finally balanced as a wired DAC. So the DAC sound is always better than the Bluetooth sound, and balanced is always better than single-ended. So by this stage of my testing, I was pretty comfortable that the BTR5 is a really solid and decent device. It's not amazing, it didn't blow me away, but it was enjoyable, it was easy to use, it gave nice controls and flexibility over the sound, and there's really nothing to knock about it, it just doesn't reach the heights because of that slightly blunted sound. I should also mention, you can tweak the sound a little bit further by playing with those harmonics controls I spoke about before. There's second harmonics and there's third harmonics you can adjust. Now by adding second harmonics, it's kind of like adding tubes where you can get a little bit of extra warmth and a little bit of extra sense of spatial information coming through in the sound. Adding third harmonics brings a bit more of a sense of harshness and edge. So in theory, you can maybe take out some of that blunting with a bit of the third harmonics, but you're going to be doing it at the cost of a bit of harshness and potentially therefore flattening the soundstage a bit. Personally, I found the second harmonics were quite enjoyable and I did find myself raising them a little bit. Third harmonics, I'd probably leave as they are, but that's just me. So having played around with it at length, I then decided to put it up next to the product that I've had for years as my version of what the BTR5 does. And that's the Astell Kern XB10. The XB10 is this little round sort of hockey puck shaped thing, and it's designed as only a Bluetooth DAC. So this will not do a line input type DAC, it's purely Bluetooth. In all other ways, it's really similar. It's got microphones for calls, it's got single-ended and balanced outputs, and realistically it's a direct competitor for the BTR5 as a Bluetooth DAC. So with that in mind, I put the two of them up against each other for sound quality. A few things I noticed along the way was that the difference between single-ended and balanced is lesser on the XB10 than it is on the BTR5. But I did most of my testing for both of them using balanced to get the maximum sound quality out of each and compare the maximum potential for each. The XB10 is a little bit less powerful but seems to have slightly higher gain or at least larger steps in the volume. One thing I didn't mention before is that with the BTR5 you've got the Bluetooth volume on your device as well as an inbuilt amplifier volume control within the BTR5. That's both good and bad. It gives you a lot more fine control over the volume levels, but it does mean you've got to decide where you want to control the volume. Do you max one out and then use the other one as the volume? Do you put one in the center and then use the other? There's a bit of fiddling involved. In the case of the XB10, the volume control is the Bluetooth volume control. So when you press up and down volume on the XB10, you're changing the volume on your device. I think that may have influenced my perception of the gain from these two, but I'm not entirely sure. All I know is that with less increase of the volume on the XB10, I seem to get to a louder level. What that also means is that with more sensitive IEMs, I was hearing some hiss with the XB10 that I didn't from the BTR5. That may immediately sound like a deal breaker, but ultimately the sound quality from the XB10 was better than the BTR5, and therefore I'm kind of willing to forgive the fact that it produces a little bit of hiss. The XB10 sound was clearer and more articulate overall, and produced a better sense of layering, separation and space compared to the slightly thick and muddy BTR5, which on its own is still a good sounding device, but in comparison doesn't quite stack up to the XB10 so long as you can live with a little bit of hiss in those sensitive IEMs. If you're using headphones or less sensitive IEMs, the XB10 really has no flaws at all, and unless you need a wired DAC like the BTR5 can offer, I would say the XB10 is the better choice. One other thing that might be a deciding factor with the XB10 is it doesn't do high res, so it only goes up to 192.24, but that's probably going to be enough if you're talking Bluetooth only. So having played with the XB10, I wrote up all my notes for this review, and then just before I got ready to record, a new contender arrived, and that's the Shanling UP4. Now you'd be forgiven for thinking I've just picked up the BTR5 again because they look almost identical. However, there's a few things to note. The BTR5 here in my left hand is a little bit taller and a little bit thinner. Another thing about the BTR5, and you'll have seen this in the Glamour video, is the BTR5 has a little OLED or LCD display built into the front here. In the case of the Shanling UP4, it uses coloured LEDs to tell you what's going on. It's a much clumsier system, and you've got to have a reference card available to remember what's what. One other thing going against the Shanling is it doesn't feel quite as sturdy and solid as the BTR5. It's lighter, which might be a benefit if you're chucking it in a pocket, but it does feel a little bit less sturdy than the FiiO. On the flip side though, there's some really nice things about the UP4. One of them is it's got this little rotary volume control, which I find much easier than having to constantly press the up and down volume on the BTR5, because with this one you can just spin away and it's going up or it's going down. With the BTR5, because the volume control is also skipping forwards and backwards a track, you can't press and hold it to move up through the volume. In the case of the UP4, you can do exactly that. You still have the ability to skip tracks, it's just done in a different way, and I think it's preferable on the UP4. So interface-wise, they're kind of a split. There are things that are better about the BTR5, there are things that are better about the UP4. Other than that, they both use identical DACs, they're priced very, very similarly, and realistically, there's not much difference between the two. FiiO has the edge with the app, it also has the harmonics controls and the balance controls, but in most other ways, the two of them are pretty similar. There's filters, there's gain settings, all the sorts of normal things you'd expect are available in both. And of course, they're both also able to be cabled DACs. So as is often the case, the choice for me would come down to sound quality. And in listening to both of them, I found that I definitely preferred the UP4 by a moderate margin. It's not a huge difference, but it's enough that I would choose the UP4 despite some slight interface limitations that I've already mentioned. Ultimately, what held the BTR5 back was once again that thicker, slightly blunted sound approach. They're quite similar sounding devices overall, but there's just a better sense of freedom and openness in the music from the UP4 that the BTR5 can't match. It's not a massively bigger soundstage, the layering is not hugely better, but it's just an easier listen because things are more open, more articulate, and therefore for me, more enjoyable. I can imagine in some cases, some people might choose the BTR5 if you had a particularly lean sounding headphone. It might be beneficial to have that extra warmth and thickness if you're listening to something that's a little bit lean to start with. But in most cases, I do think the UP4 is preferable. So what I'm finding as we were going along here is that whilst the BTR5 is a really beautifully made device, it feels great, it looks really good with these glass, shiny black panels, everything about it looks and feels fantastic, it just doesn't quite stack up in the sound quality. And that's often what I've found with FiiO devices, and one of the reasons I don't own a lot, and therefore don't feature too many on the channel. That's not to say there aren't fantastic FiiO devices out there. There are many of the new models that I've never listened to, so I'm not making a general statement about FiiO. I'm just saying that this fits with my perception of FiiO based on past products I've listened to. And in doing so, it's a little bit disappointing when there's alternatives like the UP4 and the XB10 on the market. Apologies to Jeff if I'm reducing your impressions of your own product. I really don't like saying negative things about products that people send me, but I've done that a couple of times lately with the Heresy and the BTR5, so I apologise. It's a great device as a do-it-all, do-everything sort of product, but I just think there's some better sounding products on the market if you're willing to give up a little bit of the sound control that the BTR5 provides. One other test I wanted to try before I wrapped everything up was to put the FiiO BTR5 up against the Earmen Eagle. I've got 3 of the Earmen devices here for review at the moment, and the Eagle was a nice comparison as a similar price point type device that in this case is a pure wide or hard connection DAC. The Earmen Eagle is a dongle style device with a USB-A socket at one end, then the body of the device and a 3.5 output. There's no balanced connectivity and there's no Bluetooth. But I thought if somebody's looking at this as more of a compact inline DAC, it might be worth considering what else they could buy. And the Earmen Eagle just happened to have arrived. What I found as I listened to the two was that the Eagle was clearly better. It's obviously not going to have any of the features and functionalities that the BTR5 offers. It's what I would call a pretty dumb device. And I don't mean that in a negative way, I just mean that it plugs into your computer and it spits out sound. There's no EQs, there's no Bluetooth, there's no filtering, it just takes digital audio in and spits out analog. If you've got software on your computer or your smartphone that you can then tweak the sound with, that's all well and good, but there's nothing built in like there is with the BTR5. What you are getting though is much better separation and dynamics. The sound from the Eagle for the price you're paying is absolutely stellar, and I'll talk about that a lot more in detail when I do the review. So by the way, if you're interested in the Earmen product, make sure you hit that subscribe button. They'll be coming out in the next few weeks, probably starting early in January. Ultimately what I found here was that despite being a single-ended output, even when I compared it to the balanced output of the BTR5, the Earmen Eagle was noticeably cleaner and clearer. As I said before, some people are still going to like the thicker, fuller sound of the BTR5, but it does blunt the dynamics a little bit, and that to me is more important than the extra touch of warmth. So now, having gone through all these different comparisons, I have to say I've still maintained my opinion that the BTR5 is okay, it's decent, there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, but I think unless you really want the EQ, the balance control, and or the harmonics controls, I think realistically I'd go in a different direction. And having gone a bit further with this comparison after my original XB10 tests, I'd actually point people in the direction of the Shanling UP4, which I'll provide a full review of soon, and or I'd send them to the Earmen Eagle. Obviously it depends on whether they want wired DAC only or whether they want the Bluetooth focus of something like the UP4. Once again, thank you Jeff for making this possible. I know there'll be a lot of people out there that might be considering the BTR5, so you've done them a massive service by allowing me to do this comparison. So thank you for that, and I will try to find a way to say thanks and also to maybe soften the blow of me saying not the most glowing things about this product. Once again, I want to stress there's nothing wrong with it. It's a good, solid product in isolation, but I just think there's better options out there from a pure sound quality point of view. I haven't come across anything though that has the flexibility and the versatility of the BTR5 with all of those settings I mentioned. So thank you, Jeff. I hope everyone else has found this review useful and helpful. If you have, drop a thanks to Jeff down in the comments below. Happy listening, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.